Welcome back. Last time we concluded our discussion of Al-Farabi, and will now turn to Ibn Sina, the greatest of the Masha'i philosophers who later brought the school to its peak. He's known as Avicenna in the West because Ibn in Hebrew was translated as Avi. That's also why Ibn Rushd is known as Averroes in the West. It's good to know the Western Latin names, so if you run across them, you'll know whom they're referring to. I'll summarize Ibn Sina's life for you because it reveals what kind of a person he was and the exceptional intellectual powers God had given him. Ibn Sina was born in what is today Central Asia, near Bukhara and Balkh. His father was an Ismaili, although Ibn Sina was not. Whether he was a Shafi'i or 12 Imam Shiite, we don't know. There's a lot of debate about this. But his father was a very well-known scholar, and all kinds of physicians, philosophers, and mathematicians frequented the house. So Ibn Sina was brought up in an ambiance of great learning. By the age of 5, he knew the Quran by heart, and at 10 years old, he wrote his first treatise in Arabic, despite the fact that Persian was his mother tongue. By the time he was 16 years old, he was such a famous physician and philosopher that when the king in Bukhara fell sick, Ibn Sina was called to cure him. That's unimaginable that a person could teach himself medicine to the extent that he would become so famous as a doctor that the king would call for him. Anyway, he cured the king miraculously, and the king asked him, "What do you want?" He said, "I want access to your royal library," which was the most important library outside of Baghdad at the time, having several 100,000 books. He spent the next 2 years from the age of 16 to 18 studying day and night in that library. By the time he was 18, he was already the most famous physician and philosopher of the Islamic world. And Ibn Sina was to write in his autobiography at the end of his life that, quote, "What I know now is no more than what I knew when I was 18 years old. It's deepened somewhat, but really I don't know anything more," unquote. So he reached a high plateau of knowledge early in life and stayed on that plateau until he died. When the Turks invaded his homeland, Ibn Sina fled his home city at the invitation of a prince in Jordania, which is about 500 miles from Bukhara. With 3 other young men, he walked from Bukhara to Jordania through the vast desert between today's Iran and Turkmenistan. His companions died on the way of hunger and thirst and hardship, but Ibn Sina made it. He had an extremely sturdy constitution. He arrived in Jordania having lost his home, family, belongings, and possessing nothing except his tremendous knowledge. Unfortunately, the prince who had invited him had died, but he was accepted as a court physician. During the next 36 years, from the age of 21 until the age of 57 when he died, Ibn Sina traveled mostly between the 3 cities of Ray, Isfahan, and Hamadan. Ibn Sina is the first great Islamic philosopher who did not visit Baghdad. The farthest west he got was Hamadan in today's western Iran. Ibn Sina made his living as a physician, ranking alongside Galen and Hippocrates as the most famous physicians. But his book, the Canon of Medicine, is more famous than anything that they wrote. It was translated into Latin 3 times, and in order for you to know how important this book was, when Gutenberg invented modern printing, the first book that was published was the Gutenberg Bible. The second book was the collected works of St. Augustine, and the third book was the Qanun of Ibn Sina. It was taught for 700 years in Europe as the most important book of medicine. No book has ever matched its significance, and Ibn Sina was considered almost like a magical healer, and he made many important discoveries. He had unbelievable concentration, because during the time he was a royal physician, oftentimes he would have to go to war. His most important philosophical work is a book which is called the Book of Healing. It's so difficult that a person needs years of philosophical training just to read it. But Ibn Sina wrote much of it while going to battle with the king. He always had a scribe with him, and as they were heading for battle, he would be dictating the kitab. and then suddenly fighting would break out. They would get down from their horse to get behind a rock or something, and then as soon as the fighting would stop, he would continue the sentence. One cannot understand how a person who is in the thick of all kinds of activities could write so much and train so many students. That Ibn Sina could do this is a testament to his remarkable character, strength, and towering intellect. This concludes our segment on Ibn Sina's life. In our next segment, we'll conclude our discussion of Ibn Sina by examining his works on philosophy, and will return to the most influential Islamic peripatetic philosopher on the West, Ibn Rushd, known as Averroes in Latin.